the participants to this call. We are doing this as part of the activities on cybersecurity knowledge sharing, which are organized by the Uganda National SAT and Computer Emergency Response Team, which is under NITA Uganda. And for this second webinar, we are proud to focus on a new concept around cybersecurity. It's new for some they're already novices and others are pros, but we're talking about zero trust, which we do have a very good presenter who will be leading us in this session today. And obviously we want to thank ISACA Kampala chapter for also offering their time to support this particular webinar. I want to introduce the chairperson of this event, Ms. Geraldine Mugumya. She is a risk analyst at the National Information Technology Authority, Uganda. She has over 5 years experience in risk management, where she's very strong in driving the National Information Security Framework. Geraldine, you're welcome. Hand over to you.
Okay, thank you, Emma, for that warm introduction. Just before I invite our distinguished speaker today, just a few rules of engagement for our participants. Please use the Q&A option, it's below your screen, to send in your question as the session progresses. So I'd like to introduce our speaker, Mr. Bernard Wanyama, who is a cybersecurity and digital infrastructure expert and is the president of ISACA Kampala chapter. Bernard is a seasoned professional in the IT industry with a strong focus on IT service delivery, cybersecurity, information security, and systems integration. He has over 17 years of industry experience and has previously held IT service management roles with Barclays, which is now ABSA, Bank of Africa. For more than 12 years at Syntech Associates, he has worked on projects for clients such as Google, UNICEF, Coca-Cola, MTN, Airtel, Fred Hutch Cancer Research, Andela, Arizona Computer Services, and Deloitte, which is in Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. He is an active member of ISACA, serving as the president of the chapter, and on the ISACA volunteer committees. He's the reviewer of the 8th edition of CGET Review Manual and a member of the CGET exam item development working group. He is also an APMG accredited trainer for CISA and CISM courses. He is also a mentor and a She Leads Tech ambassador. His volunteer work also includes mentoring, training, coaching of leaders in the IT industry and beyond. He is also a regular speaker at IT conferences on the areas of information security, IT risk and governance, cloud computing, and site reliability engineering. He's married to Diana, and together they have 3 children, where they live here in Kampala, Uganda. Over to you, Bernard, and you are welcome. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Geraldine, for the many words of introduction. I was not aware that you would read all those things. I should have said a fewer words. It's my pleasure to be here today with all of you. And I hope that as we go through today's presentation, we'll have better understanding of cybersecurity risk and some approaches that can help us to deliver better risk management, but also better outcomes for the stakeholders who might be end users, employers, and those people that depend on information systems to live their lives, earn a living, and carry out other important activities. So today we'll be talking about zero trust architecture, and it's really a way of approaching cybersecurity, approaching information security, approaching network security and access control in light of modern threats and challenges. and overcoming weaknesses in legacy models. And so that will be the gist of our discussion. And I hope it will be useful and valuable for all of us. So this is what our agenda looks like. We'll look at an overview, then we'll look at the justification for zero trust. We'll delve into a bit of the technical stuff regarding the principles of zero trust, and then we'll wrap it up with a few ideas and some question and answer engagements. So the essence of security today or across the expanse or the span of time is that you are really trying to work out trust. How do you trust? How do you safeguard your trust? How do you extend your trust in a way that is not misplaced? And how do you ensure that that trust works out for you positively? So essentially, human transactions will be underpinned by trust. The more the trust, the more value human beings attach to those relationships, and the more they can transact, the more they can do. The definition of trust, I went around and I kind of formed this word cloud. And the bigger the words, the more they featured the different definitions. So you are looking at someone and something, and you're looking for confidence, ability, truth, hope, belief, accuracy, effective, strength, safety, and those words that inspire confidence, that inspire hope, that allow people to go beyond the limitations they might have of things they don't know and actually engage at a next level where they believe that they'll be safe, they believe they'll be in good hands, they believe that the outcome will be positive rather than negative. So the trust but verify saying was pioneered in the 1980s during the Cold War negotiations by Richard Nixon. Not Richard Nixon, I'm sorry. Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev on opposite ends of the Cold War. And it was kind of a Russian saying that Ronald Reagan was taught and he loved to use at all negotiations that he made whenever he met his counterpart. And when Gorbachev asked him, why do you use this word all the time? You use it so frequently. Reagan said, I love it. I love it. And so the whole trust but verify saying and proverb came into mainstream English language through the Cold War security discussion scenario. And that has built up into physical and cybersecurity thinking that we have today. But bringing it back to zero trust, the term itself was coined by a Forrester research analyst called John Kinderberg in 2010. And his idea was, instead of trust but verify, it would be never trust, but always verify, to show that the stakes had moved away from trust first, but verification had to be offered or executed more frequently than in the past. So the assumption really is that you have risk both on the inside and the outside of the network. The concept of the good guys being inside and the bad guys being outside the network at a certain point becomes invalid. And so one has to believe and assume that internal and external parts of the network are all subject to high levels of risk, and one cannot implicitly trust an entity depending on its location. So the whole idea of trusting insiders and believing that you only have to focus on the outside, that gets debunked by the kind of risks, the kind of threats, and the kinds of incidents that we are experiencing even at this particular moment in terms of whatever you've been hearing out there, the latest cybersecurity incident news. And so the zero trust paradigm or way of thinking becomes something that is really important for everybody to start to consider as we attempt to strengthen our defenses, as we attempt to design new business solutions, new network security solutions, new interactions. It has to be carried into every discussion and every model of interaction to allow us to appreciate risk in the first instance and appropriately, and not to take assumptions that might compromise our ability to manage that risk. So this is a brief timeline. So taking it back to 1994, you have, I think this was a master's degree thesis by a gentleman called Stephen Paul Marsh. And he came up with something like zero trust in his thesis. Then a bit later, I think that's about 2003, the Jericho Forum of CISOs meeting in London came up with an idea of doing away with the network perimeter, the whole idea that you have a firewall standing in between a very dangerous internet and a very innocent, naive, and must be protected internal network. That idea started to lose ground or lose credence. And so the CISOs under the Jericho Forum commenced a deperimeterization discussion. And fast forward to 2009, we had perhaps the first large-scale zero trust network architecture build by Google. And their build was called, or their zero trust network is called Beyond COP. And it's a very interesting implementation that builds upon the principles of zero trust and takes them to the largest scale possible, protecting over 200,000 Google employees with a very high record of effectiveness. And so I'd encourage everyone to take a look at it in terms of what they were able to do and how they were able to do it. And they have really gone ahead to be open and share the best practices and the approaches that really work on the basis of their experience. Then come to 2010, our Forrester analyst starts to coin the zero trust network paradigm as a thing in terms of Forrester and Gartner analysis of trends and things, technologies that are becoming important. Then in 2018, the US government National Institute of Science and Technology produces the NIST SP 800-207 publication on zero trust architecture, which then gives way or gives a basis to a 2021 mandate by the Biden administration for all US government entities to implement zero trust networks or zero trust security models on their networks as a response to the large scale of attacks on critical national infrastructure and other US government information systems from really all over the place. And so this is an evolution of a concept coming into actual implementation, first from a private non-government entity, and now you see it taking shape in a federal or government setup or public sector setup, which means the maturity curve has been ridden to an extent that public sector organizations are now able to mandate it and deliver it as part of their networks and as part of their operations. So why does zero trust matter? We could have pointed to it a bit, but let's delve into that a bit more and understand where it comes from. So in my understanding, there's really two things that drive zero trust. One is the way human beings think of boundaries and perimeters and safety and security in the physical sense, because all computer or digital or virtual infrastructure is built upon our understanding of the natural world, and the interactions in the natural world. That's what motivates and inspires and defines the digital world that we exist in. And so human beings import their understanding, knowledge, biases, and even misunderstanding of security and risk into digital or cyber operations. And that's just because they're human beings. That's who they are, and that's how they'll act, because of their understanding and their conceptualization of the different aspects of risk and security. And then obviously, having had that bias or that foundation, then you have the reality of what actually goes on in terms of the risks and the threats that are evolving in the cyberspace today. And so going back in history, or going back to the traditional sense of security, human beings believe in fences, they believe in walls. So you could see our Chinese friends have their Great Wall right over there. And then here is something more closer to home. This is a typical kraal homestead, kraal-based homestead, where a man and his many wives and children live in an enclosure, and perhaps in the middle of that enclosure is the wealth in that homestead, which would be the cows in this case. And then on the other hand, you have a castle, which would denote a Western Europe kind of architecture and thinking about security and fortification. But the whole idea is that you close the world out and control your space to create a perimeter in which you are safe and you can control the goings-ons in that particular domain. And so this perimeter thinking really does not start with firewalls or proxy servers and things like that. It starts with the way humans have evolved and existed and coexisted with others, friends and enemies, within the last so many millennia. Now that approach of walls and perimeters and fences starts to get challenged. You have our Greek Trojan horse kind of legends and mythology, which really denotes a clever attack on a city that was so fortified that nobody could breach the walls. The approach was to change the tactic and now carry on the breach from inside. And so that represents a leap in terms of the threat, a threat which was used to breaching walls, now being unable to breach the wall, has to adapt and become more malleable and become more, I don't want to say adaptable, but more adaptable to the tactics that the defenders are using. And so a Trojan horse now represents a sort of insider threat that counters the concept of boundaries and perimeters. And so even from the time of the Greeks, walls and perimeters had their limitations, and that really represents the kind of discussion we're having today, being able to account for the limitations and weaknesses that we're seeing coming out of a traditional perimeter-based network security approach. So today, the threats and risks that you have in the landscape are really very targeted. One of the biggest areas of targeting that will consistently show up across all statistics is targeting of credentials and identity. That really forms the biggest majority of threats or attacks or incidents or events that are represented as security threats within organizations. So each one of you receives a daily dose of phishing and spam emails which seek to steal your credentials and cause you to perform a certain activity that is to the benefit of the attacker. And so those are really identity or credential-based targets, which you could think of as targeting the workforce if you want to characterize it in an enterprise setting. And then on the other hand, we have the apps being targeted, and you could use the terminology of workloads. Now that means that you have on-prem, cloud, or anywhere in between kind of hosting of your applications and services. And so a lot of the exploits or vulnerabilities that we see are linked to publicly available information that can be used to target organizations on those applications or those servers or on those systems which have not been appropriately patched or appropriately secured. And the trend is such that organizations or defenders are lagging behind the attackers, and there's a gap in between there in terms of visibility. A lot of organizations hardly have an idea of where their workloads or where their servers or where their digital assets are. And so that creates the opportunity for hackers to compromise the organization either through ransomware or even just stealing of source code and now ransoming the organization, like what we've seen recently with Microsoft, Okta, Samsung, and NVIDIA, in terms of having their internal software, source code, and intellectual property being compromised by attackers through different techniques, and the ransoming process going public in the sense that attackers are now threatening big internet corporations, and there's a financial consideration in between there. And then you have, on the other hand, the workplace phenomena, which is small but growing. Its impact is going to be felt as more and more organizations adopt IoT or Internet of Things. And Internet of Things is not just a smart something within a living room. It could be a CCTV camera. It could be a biometric door control or gate control, physical access control device. It could be a printer. It could be really anything that's connected on the network and is not directly used by a human being to interface with it. So a phone, a printer, a barcode scanner, whatever you have within your infrastructure that is network connected and delivers value to the organization, that is IoT or Internet of Things. And so malware targeting those devices is growing. It's a new trend. It's a new opportunity for threat actors. And so that presents another dimension in the landscape that we have to account for in terms of risk management and visibility. So the IT landscape itself, as we've seen and as we've always said, is changing. We have an evolving perimeter. Today, organizations have a lot of their data hosted outside the organization. They have a lot of their employees working outside the organization. And so it starts to seem as if the data and the employees and everybody has left the building. Everybody has left the perimeter. Everybody has left the network. The network exists on the outside of the organization much more than it does on the inside, to the extent that any organization that is data-driven and is invested in applications, APIs, and uses those to make money has to externalize those assets to allow them to be made use of by their customers and business partners in order for them to be able to make money and earn value from whatever investments or whatever data, or whatever business model they have. And so you have the externalization of systems and data and information simply challenging the paradigm of having your systems and networks and users in-house and safe from the attackers out there. Business now demands that you work with contractors, you work with third parties, your employees are able to work outside the organization from home or outside the office. And so the landscape has evolved to the extent that there is no more perimeter, there's no more data being inside. Everything is inside, outside, and somewhere in between. So looking at cloud, looking at hybrid infrastructure, looking at IoT devices, about the personal and mobile devices, which are used by employees to run office business. You read your email on your personal phone maybe, or you access personal work on a company laptop because it's the one that you have and it's the one that you use. And so the realities are such that the whole perimeter does not exist per se. It only exists in the minds of a few people who do not want to change, but the externalization of infrastructure, data, and end users means that we no longer have a perimeter to talk of, and so we must think differently about perimeter. So at a business level and at a risk level, we have the whole scenario bringing us to a point of excessive trust being granted to end users and other entities within the ecosystem. You have increased access. You're always working to open up and connect and engage and integrate with a partner, with a third party, launch an app, launch a feature, launch a service, make it easy for people to access whatever they need to access from the outside, bring on board a new vendor, have them supporting you or developing the system remotely. And so there's a lot of opening up, and that results in increased access. It's good for the business, but on the other side, the downside in terms of risk is that your attack surface broadens or becomes bigger, and a lot of organizations now would suffer from gaps in visibility of what do we have open where. And so when you engage in a security assessment with an organization, you will find that a lot of the access that they have in terms of exposure of their assets to the outside world, a lot of that, maybe 50% of that, is unaccounted for, unknown to them, and they only discover it as a result of a formal assessment, which means that a third-party threat actor or a malicious entity has an opportunity to discover that and make use of that access to try and gain more access into the organization without the organization even having an idea of what's going on. So you have questions like, how do we know our users, who they are, and who they are who they say they are? Do you have up-to-date patching and updates on your systems? What do we have on our network? Is it all ours? Is it all accounted for? Do we have assets that we don't know about? Do we have third-party assets running on our infrastructure? What's the status of those assets? Who accesses them? Who owns them? Then you have the cloud scenario where organizations have migrated to the cloud. Some have done a comprehensive migration, while others have simply lifted and shifted to the cloud without having a sense of what cloud means and what controls or measures or changes have to go into the operations and the approach that they're using. Then looking at what then is in the cloud, do you have orphaned information? Do you have shadow IT, people who upload information and services and infrastructure into the cloud on behalf of the organization, and they may not communicate that through the right channels, and that becomes orphaned or ungoverned and still brings back the reputational or other kinds of risk to the organization because it belongs to the organization, even if the organization does not have visibility or awareness of those assets being in the cloud. So this whole situation results in the verdict, I would say, of excessive trust being granted for the sake of business running. And so you have business going fast while risk management is lagging behind in terms of what it's able to do and how it's able to keep up with the risks and the challenges that are impacting the business. And all this, ladies and gentlemen, is in real time. It's not something that you do now and 6 or 9 or 12 months later, you have some issues. you go online now, or you do not know that you're online now, and you are being compromised now. And so the time delta between exposure and actual infiltration is so short that most organizations have no idea of what's happening until it's done. And so that's really the reality of risk and business exposure that we have. And that really creates the case for a new model of network or cybersecurity, which is now in our case, zero trust. So coming back to zero trust in terms of architecture and principles, it really can be summed up in 3 tenets. Number 1, continuous verification, being able to account for who is on your network and who is accessing what all the time. Because access granted to me last year when I joined the organization might not be good enough to take me through the last 6 months. And so it means that at any one time, you have to authenticate and you have to challenge who has access to what and be able to verify that that's the right access or that's the right appropriate level of access that they need to have. And then on the other front, the second tenet would be limiting blast radius. Blast radius in this case means that if you have, say, a room like this and something goes wrong and you exploded a grenade, in a big room like this, you might lose everything because the impact spreads across the entire room. Now, if you had another kind of same room, but perhaps compartmentalized in the sense that you grant access to specific sectors or to specific areas, in the event of an incident, in the event of a blast, or in the event of a compromise, the attacker or the damage and the threat only impacts a specific part of the organization or a specific part of the infrastructure. So being able to define security access in such a way that you only grant it to a subject for what they need and nothing beyond creates this kind of blast radius limit. So the just in time or the granular kind of access control then gives you a limited blast radius in terms of what do you lose in case those credentials are compromised or in case that particular system is compromised. Do you have a situation whereby once you are in, you have access to the whole palace, or do you have sectors and security zones, which mean that crossing from one zone to the other requires authentication, authorization, and access control and accounting, which means effectively you limit the risk of lateral movement or somebody gaining initial access and having access to the entire infrastructure or a wide range of data and systems, and therefore being able to cause damage across the wider IT estate or IT infrastructure that you have. And then thirdly, the principle of being able to automate context collection and response is very important. The whole idea is that there's simply too much information in terms of logs and events to collect manually. And so there must be leveraging of automation. If you have a washing machine, do not wash your clothes yourself. Let the washing machine do it so that you can focus maybe on wearing the clothes or working to find money to buy new clothes. So being able to automate the heavy lifting, the manual tasks, and create efficiency within your ability to monitor the environment is key. A lot of organizations have great capabilities, but when it comes to correlating the information and building a picture of the threat environment, they are unable to go beyond the basics, and they do not have a full picture because their automation does not really deliver the business outcomes that they need. So many organizations will go analytics. You consolidate logs and events and create a picture of what's going on within your environment. You go analytics. The next level could be machine learning. And some organizations actually say they have the ability to do artificial intelligence as part of building a more accurate picture of the cybersecurity threat environment based on information and feedback being collected by systems. And so automation is one thing in terms of collection, but then being able to now use that as a basis to respond in real time to threats and mitigate whatever risks have showed up to prevent damage or to contain and limit that so-called blast radius that we looked at is very important. So having an automation and orchestration mechanism as part of your security capabilities is one of those things that contributes to having a zero trust approach or a zero trust paradigm to your cybersecurity operations and risk management methodology. So once again, continuous verification of the user, the machine, and what they want to access, limiting the blast radius by segmenting the network and ensuring that authorization only applies to very specific areas and no more for very specific times. That's very important. A lot of organizations do not have, you can check in, but check out, nobody knows when you checked out, or sign out is not accounted for. So there's that need to stay on top of the parameters of specificity in terms of what do you access and for how long, and being able to enforce that from start to finish and have that context collected automatically and used to build the picture. So essentially, the traditional approach we are moving away from has network-based controls and static definitions of trust and what should be granted to who. In the zero trust paradigm or way of thinking or approach or model, we are trying to use authentication at the user level. Your machine, your laptop, does it belong to organization? Is it patched? Does it have the latest antivirus? And are you working from home, or are you working from the office, or are you working from a hostile country? And what data are you accessing? Is it potentially dangerous data in terms of a privacy breach, or is it public data that is low risk in terms of access? So using all these to build context is what beats the static definition of the traditional perimeter-based model. So having context of who, what, where, when, and for how long, and does this fit into the pattern, that enrichment of knowing who your users are and what they're doing allows you to then implement zero trust basing on capabilities of data collection, analytics, and understanding who your users are and what their patterns are. And that allows you to know when something is out of the ordinary and to catch it before it happens, as opposed to catching it post-mortem. So essentially, we are going to focus on protecting our data, not the attacks that we would see on a firewall or an intrusion prevention system. We get the whole context and understand what does this event, or what does this alert or indicator of compromise mean in the whole wider context of the organizational data that we are here to protect. Then the assumption that all environments inside and outside are hostile and are breached means that you behave as though nothing is secure, and so you take necessary precautions and don't let down your guard. Then authentication at user and device level, then authorization for all access, not just when you are in, you have access to everything, but even when you're in, accessing whatever service or whatever data, whatever system has to be controlled and has to be authorized and logged and then recorded. Then encryption also forms a key part of the implementation, protecting data at all times, whether it is being transferred or it's at rest or being backed up, creates a higher level of risk management and lowers the risk of your data being stolen or exfiltrated and ransomed. And then the information collection for feedback and analysis and correlation to build the context is a foundational part of this activity. And above all, trust is temporary because things change. I think that's really the most important things, the most important takeaway from today. Things change. In my vernacular, people like to say, "Ebintu bichenjanga." Things change. You cannot rely on controls or assessments which were done 3 months ago and have a high level of confidence in those controls. And so you must then come back to a real-time, just-in-time authentication. Just because somebody was appointed executive director 5 days ago does not mean that he has access to everything without question. You must be able to constantly verify that he's actually or she's actually who she claims to be and has access to what she is requesting for. Okay, so as we go towards the end, this is the more technical stuff in terms of how it all comes together. So this is part of the Zero Trust Architecture as published by NIST in their publication SP 800-207. And it basically speaks to the key parts of the architecture or the decision-making. So you have a control plane where decisions are made, and you have a data plane where data is accessed. And so when a subject or a user, or say this could be a user, requests access to data, an enterprise resource, this could be a database, for example, at this end, they go through a policy enforcement point. This is a control, kind of a gateway. Call it a gateway, call it a gatekeeper, call it a control point, but it basically challenges the user's access request by consulting the policy engine to determine whether that user should be granted access to that particular information or resource that they need. And basing on the decision taken at this PDP, you then have access granted or access denied. So this user is within the network or outside the network, regardless of where they are. This policy decision point will then have access to a continuous device monitoring system, which accounts for the state or the health of all these endpoints. Could be laptops, could be servers, could be mobile phones or tablets. It also has rules that feed into it from the industry regulatory perspective. So you could be regulated by UCC, you could be regulated by Bank of Uganda, you could be regulated by a whole, in this case, PDPO in terms of privacy is very important for us to note because I think we all fall under this. But the whole idea that you have regulatory requirements being highlighted at enforcement of access level means that you are not taking that for granted. Then threat intelligence tells you about what's going on in the environment, the latest attacks, the latest risks, and how they behave. And then the activity logs that we've been talking about that contribute to building a picture of what is going on and how has it been happening. So these feed into the decision making. And on the other hand, you have policies defined at a business level. You have your encryption infrastructure. You have your identity management infrastructure. This could be Active Directory, it could be LDAP, or whatever other infrastructure you're using to manage your users. And then your security event management systems, looking at the correlation of the big picture to understand what's going on within the environment, all contributing into that decision-making from the user requesting access to eventually being granted access or being denied access to that particular resource. So at the back of the system is a trust algorithm, which simply decides the yes or no. Should we grant them access or not? So you have the request, then we check your history. We check if you're in the asset database. Is this a company laptop or not? Does the resource have any constraints on it? And then what does the daily intelligence look like? And how does that feed into us giving you a yes or a no verdict on the access that you've requested? So decision-making is enriched by multiple data points, and that allows you to have a more robust mechanism for delivering the decision-making on the access that you want. And because this is going to be real-time and it's going to be massively scalable, it means that you have to have a lot of resource integration and engineering going into this to ensure that it works and is able to meet the needs of your peak time and your busy periods as an organization. So you could look at two types of trust algorithms. So there's a criteria versus score. Criteria means that maybe you have 7 out of 10. The pass mark is 7 out of 10. If you meet 7 requirements out of 10, you pass. And if you are below, maybe no. Score means that we take an aggregate and we give you maybe 80% or 20%, and we can make a decision on that. Then singular versus contextual. Singular is yes, no. While contextual, we try to understand who you are, what's your history, where have you been all this while, what have you been doing, and does this correlate with your historical access, and does it represent a likely fraud event or likely malicious event, or is it a legitimate access request? And so the disposition of the algorithm depends on the business that you're in and the ability to implement it. So as we come to an end, I will just recap that zero trust means perimeterless. Discard the perimeter thinking and start to think that data is accessed everywhere and must be protected everywhere. The default is to deny all unless there's an allow, but you cannot have explicit permit simply because you are inside the building, or you're an employee, or you're using a work computer. Authentication cuts across devices, users, infrastructure, applications, and services all the time. Access is authorized centrally and in real time, and we build upon context. So the key word is really context, understanding what is going on, not just saying yes or no. All right, like our very dedicated security guards at the reception or at the gate, but actually being able to interrogate maybe the way a receptionist would, to understand who you are and what you want, and if you have an appointment, and then be able to verify. So that kind of context enriches the risk management and gives you better decision-making because you have multiple data points upon which you're using, upon which you're basing to take a decision. I included an example of a zero trust implementation, and it doesn't look pretty, but let's just try to define it in a minute or two and see if there are examples that we can relate to. So as the previous model, the generic model, you have the control plane for decision-making, well-defined, and then you have the data plane in which the access is requested and access is granted. And so your endpoint here could be your laptop, your user on a laptop, and then you have policy enforcement points like a switch or a firewall or an intrusion prevention system consulting the policy engine for decision-making. And then the policy engine consults the trust engine to decide should you grant access or not. And then you have that enforcement point granting you access at that level. So you get access to the network. Then after getting access to the network, you then have to request access to the application. And that also takes you through the same process. And you now have a situation whereby just getting access to the network or just being on the network does not mean anything. You have to gain access to the network. And after gaining access to the network, based on a policy decision, you have to then, for each application or service that you need, you have to still gain access through the policy engine that is mandated to grant access. So it could be on-premise applications. It could be applications outside the network in terms of cloud or any other data center or any other partner site that you may have. And so at this level of the control plane, you have our policy engine taking input from the user inventory, where you define your users. That could be your AD or LDAP or whatever other, or SQL, depending on what you want to do with it. Then your asset inventory, which has a listing of all your employee-owned and corporate-owned devices, hardware, which is authorized. And then workload and app inventory speaks to the cloud systems that you have running as an organization. So that really represents a typical zero trust implementation, the control plane and the data plane, but then you have access being granted at multiple policy enforcement points, which consult the policy decision point, which is the policy engine. Okay, so this is an example of what Google did. I think we may not have the time to go through it fully, but their idea was that whether you are within a Google building or you are in a public network, you are all subjected to the access proxy, which is part of the PDP, the policy decision point. And so at this level, you have, this is now your control plane, determining who has access to what. And then you have your device inventories tracking who has which laptop. And for them, they are using certificate and public infrastructure to authenticate laptops. So you have your users also being defined here. It could be AD or LDAP, depending on what they use inside Google. And so that then means that whether you are inside the network or outside the network, you are still subjected to access control, which is robust and able to determine that you are who you are and you're using a safe device, which belongs to the company, and it is in good health. So device health here really matters, because if you do not have good device health, then your credentials can be stolen, even if you're using a company laptop. So quickly, outcomes are reduced risk, better visibility, and perhaps more efficiency in terms of security operations. And as I conclude, I think the takeaway that is important for us all is that the perimeter no longer exists as it was defined many years ago. There is no more perimeter. The users have left the building. That is the reality. Credentials and identity are your new perimeter in terms of what you need to protect. The attacks and the threat and the risks are going to be targeting those credentials, because from anywhere you can access anything. And that means that your credentials become the new point of contention. So assume breach. Do not believe that being inside the building is safer than being outside, or being at home is safer than being in a cafe. Then your insiders are going to be the greatest risk, the people. Some of them are going to be targets, but others will be threats. And so having a comprehensive understanding of your insider risk is very important, and growing your programs to protect your insiders and allow them to understand risk management through ethics programs and security awareness is going to go a long way in building up your zero trust model or your zero trust implementation to come together. All right, so this is it. Verify, then trust, and then verify all the time, and then do that all the time, every day, and don't stop. I'd like to thank you so much. I'm going to hand it back to Geraldine and see if we have time for questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bernard. That was quite amounts of knowledge to take in. I've actually quite learned a few things. Thank you for breaking down the zero trust, right? From, what it is, sharing some examples. I believe the participants have been able to pick out some important knowledge. So we'll just, I know we have like 2 minutes left, but we'll try and answer the questions. Participants, you just give us some extra minutes so that we can be able to answer some of the questions. The first one will be from Will Broyd. Based on the evolution in technologies leading to the principle of zero trust, can there be a security blueprint that organizations can deploy to scale their IT infrastructures?
Well, thank you, Wilbrod. I think there's a lot of blueprints. The best blueprint for now, in my opinion, is the NIST SP 800. That really presents the basis. But then you have a lot of vendors who are now delivering zero trust as part of their portfolio. So looking at the entire security landscape, everybody from Cisco to VMware to Microsoft to Google has a zero trust implementation that is very specific to their technologies or specific areas. But the advice I could give to everybody is that you need to look at your organization and to start small by just improving the basics that you have and treating the zero trust evolution as a journey. You cannot buy something next month and install it and make it your zero trust setup. There has to be a lot of components and a lot of change in approach, the mental model, the paradigm, and the approach, the processes, and the requirements, and the investments, and the decisions that you make for architecture, acquisition, and implementation. All those go into building your zero trust capability. So it's a journey that you take on. Many organizations have a lot of things in place. So working with those capabilities to start with as a foundation is something that I could advise everybody to take on.
Okay. Another question is from Steven. Implementing a zero trust architecture from the presentation looks like a journey to attain this posture. For the SME space, which does not usually have this concept in place, where does a business or organization start, or what basic things need to be implemented to start the zero trust journey?
All right, so you need to start by changing your thinking, really. Zero trust is thinking. It's not a product. It's not a solution. People are selling them as full-fledged solutions, but zero trust is a way of thinking. And I think I've labored to make that very clear. So let's start by changing the way we think so that we do not make the same mistakes we've been making in the traditional approach. So the paradigm is very important. Having achieved the paradigm shift, then your security policy, your approach to implementation, the decisions you make will lead you to a zero trust way of operations. So, for example, if you take on a zero trust model in terms of your risk management, IT risk management as an organization, it then means that you, for example, start to require two-factor authentication, whether you are in the office or outside the office, whether you are on a work laptop or on a personal laptop. The authentication is going to be up there, basing on the zero trust paradigm that you cannot trust a user basing on their location. So start by changing the paradigm and then implement different measures in different capabilities or different areas, and that will bring up the risk profile and make it zero trust compatible.
Another additional question from Stephen. He says there are a number of vendor solutions from Microsoft, Cisco, etc. in the market which are costly. Can the Bs benefit from cost-effective vendor solutions. I think he's saying single, multiple vendor implementation.
Okay, so the cost is always an issue, but really for me, as I say, don't think of buying anything yet. There's always things to buy, and everybody now is selling zero trust, fortunately. So the next time you go to buy anything, it will be probably zero trust compatible, whether it's a firewall or a cloud tenancy, or an endpoint security system like antivirus, anti-malware is going to have, or remote access VPN is going to be zero trust compatible. Whether it's open source or commercial, there's a move to zero trust. But what makes most sense is you starting to think as an organization in a zero trust way, and then building on whatever infrastructure you have, whatever capabilities you have in place. And then as you make decisions to migrate, to upgrade, to acquire, they fall in line with that zero trust model and they fit into what you have. So it's a journey. You don't have to buy anything today or tomorrow, but all you have to do is to change your thinking and start to consolidate your infrastructure and your capabilities around zero trust.
Bernard, we'll take 3 more questions, then I'll request you to respond the others with, by typing them, because given that we have passed our time. But question from Patrick, he's asking, assuming a zero trust approach, are there any practical measures that as individuals we can take to protect our digital assets, even starting from our own smartphones?
So the idea is that you don't trust your phone the way you might be led to. For example, putting all your passwords there and saving your passwords, and putting all your data there, saving your cards. You start to assess the risk. What happens if I lose this phone, and what is linked on that phone, and then what does it mean? And so you change your approach, the implicit trust that you grant to a phone because it's yours and it's expensive and you bought it and you really love it. You take away that emotional attachment and you start to appreciate the risk for what it is, and then make decisions based on what risk is currently existing in that particular scenario. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes. The next question. Many organizations are stuck with the traditional way of doing things. How can we create a mind shift and also enforce policies that the institutions have in place?
Thank you. So I think it's important to start to discuss, because this is it's mindset. It's not technology, it's mindset. And when you have to do mindset change, it takes engagement. You have to discuss, you have to talk, you have to speak to people, to speak to developers, to speak to IT security people, to speak to risk management professionals, to speak to those in charge of governance, those in charge of approving budgets and making architecture decisions. It's got to be a consensus that we are moving in this direction because it works for us, it delivers better outcomes, it reduces the risk and gets us more efficiency in terms of delivering on our portfolio. So mindset shift, mindset change is going to be about engagement, and that's when you have a more enduring change and a more enduring set of outcomes around zero trust and any other positive or relevant paradigms that are worth implementing in your organization.
Okay. Bernard, given the time, I'll request you to maybe share your last remarks, and then you can type the response to the questions, given that we have run out of time. Yes.
All right, thank you very much, Geraldine. And I would like to thank Nita and Satyuji and all the other colleagues and partners who have brought this session to life and the other sessions that are going on. We need to work together to improve the state of cybersecurity within our economy, within the industry, and that should be able to allow those who depend on information systems to earn more value and spend less money in terms of incidents and losses that arise out of cyber issues. I encourage everyone to keep engaging in these events. I think soon we shall have an opportunity to do physical events. Let's build up our knowledge. Things like cloud, data analytics, those really contribute to your being able to deliver on cybersecurity, technical and non-technical outcomes. So I encourage everybody to build up their skills and let's keep sharing. I think we are going to have a great community as we go along. So thank you so much and have a great afternoon.
Okay. On behalf of NITA and the National SAT and Coordination Center, I want to say thank you so much for honoring our invitation to come and share your knowledge on this important topic. I believe it has been very informative and insightful, and also, the responses to the questions raised. I believe the participants are happy with the responses. And to the participants, thank you so much for attending this webinar. We look forward to your participation in the next session, which will happen next Thursday at same time at 2 p.m. And this time we will focus on what you need to know about privacy in engineering. Thank you so much and have a blessed week. Goodbye. Bernard is going to stay on and respond to the questions that were raised. So you can stick around and get the responses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Geraldine. I think I have to step into another meeting, so maybe we'll take it up later.
No problem. I'll share the questions with you and then we can send them to the participants. Yeah, I think that will work. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.